Alright, per usual, this episode is starting with the truth. Jake Crawford is one of my least favorite characters. Like with Vince, my dislike of Jake started to dissipate in the season 1 episode A Cry for Help when he talks to Bodhi about having started a fire as a child. However, unlike Vince, who I really started to understand over time, Jake is a character who started to frustrate me not long after I started liking him. During the process of writing this essay, I gained a new appreciation for him and the parts of his life, and I hope you will too. I found that over the course of writing these essays, my opinions about characters really change as I'm working on them. The show goes so fast that there are parts of their lives that are easy to skip over or forget. Also, Jake is a character that we continue to learn more about in a way that continuously recontextualizes his behavior that makes you stop and go, maybe I was wrong about this guy. As a result, I'm going to have to break 2 of the rules that you guys have become very accustomed to seeing as I work on this essay. The first is that usually I show you the storyline first and then I dig into how the character works. But just like I'm doing with Vince, Luke, and Sharon, I'm going to have to do it the other way around. I'm going to have to show you how Jake works, and then, and only then, am I really going to be able to talk about his storyline. But there's another rule too, one that I've been pretty meticulous about following, and that's that we talk about the character based on what we see in those first 16 episodes. For pretty much everyone, this is a good rule, though I did do an entire essay about Walter and his behavior in season 3, but we needed to do that to talk about Luke and Vince. These are characters for whom we didn't get their trauma in the first 16 episodes, but it's vital to understand them as characters. I'm going to have to do that with Jake too. I feel like we get a teeny tiny hint that his behavior is related to his dad's death in the episode Work Don't Worry, but we don't really dig into it by itself until, frankly, as of late in season 4. As of time of writing this, which was the second full week of February, we still don't know how Jake's dad died, and overall, details about characters' lives can be sparse. That being said, I want to walk you through everything that we know about Jake's life before Riley died. Then I'll explain what I think that taught him, and at that point we can look at his storyline. These video essays are meant to build an understanding and appreciation of how meticulously the show and the characters are constructed, and I hope this essay does that for you with Jake. We know that Jake's parents are Lily and Barry Crawford. By all accounts, he had a normal childhood for an only child. He and his dad went to church every weekend, and afterward they went to Mabel's Smoked Meats. Mabel's is a family-owned barbecue restaurant known for their Tiger Wood sandwiches and rib eating competition. In February of 2000, Jake and Barry won that competition, eating about 6 pounds of ribs, but Mabel jokes that 7-year-old Jake didn't have nearly as much to do with the record as he remembers. We've been told several times that the 3 moved around a lot when Jake was younger, but when he was 11, he moved next door to the Leone family. As a visual, Eve lived across the street and Cara lived on the other side of the Leone house. Eve became best friends with Riley at about age 9, and Jake became best friends with Bodhi when he was 11 or 12. We know there is an age gap between Riley and Bodhi, but the age gap between Bodhi and Eve is only a couple months, so it's possible these events were separated by a year or 2. Unbeknownst to 11-year-old Jake, because parenting is hard, Barry and Lily had decided to get a divorce. Not because of any problems, but simply because their marriage was lovely and now it was done. As they were waiting to tell their 11-year-old son, Barry fell in love and fathered a second child, who we now know to be Malcolm Crawford. Jake found out about this, potentially before Lily did, and Barry asked him to keep the secret. It isn't clear exactly when Lily found out, but I feel like they imply in Off the Rails that she knew before Barry died. But Jake thought this was a secret, and unaware that his parents had decided to separate, he took action to keep his dad from leaving. Jake lit his curtains on fire, hoping his dad would come home, and instead Vince and Sharon showed up. The 2 decided to obscure the cause of the fire, and the community came to know this as a horrible thing that happened to the new family in town. At some point, Barry died. We still don't know how. Lilia and Malcolm's as of yet unnamed mom decided to keep the connection between their families a secret, and so Jake never learned about this until the episode Off the Rails. While this was going on, Bodhi went over to Jake's house with a bag of rocks to skip at a nearby pond. While there, their bond was established, and Jake bounced a rock off Bodhi's face. But from what I can tell, minor injuries are just a part of the male bonding experience. But there's another thing that you should know about baby Jake. He was obsessed with firefighters. So obsessed, mind you, that the kid literally went trick-or-treating as a firefighter from the ages of 2 through 14. The joy and excitement he must have felt for the fact that he moved across the street and became best friends with the son of a family of firefighters must have been just absolutely off the charts. Pretty soon, Bodhi and Jake were hanging out at the station, and if what Bodhi says about Tyler is any indication, they spent their time running drills and thinking that firefighting was the best career ever. This trope of a kid being taken in by their best friend's family, not to live with them full time, but to be there half the time, and then you get to send that child home when you're pissed off, is not uncommon in children's media. It's like Disney Channel core, right? I mean, in Girl Meets World, Maya is just constantly hanging out at Riley's house, and at school, Corey is her teacher. In iCarly, I think we only get like a couple of scenes at Sam's house or with Sam's mom, and the rest of the time she's with Carly and Spencer. And now, much to my mom's chagrin because she does not enjoy the show, I think it's time for me to talk about one of my favorite shows, and that's Psych. Actually, it's kind of concerning to me that I didn't spot all the similarities between Psych and Fire Country. I mean, sure, yes, we could say that it's about mixed race best friends who work together, but I feel like boiling their similarities down to just that is an insult to anybody who has seriously watched either one of these shows, and Psych is like the ultimate cult classic. Perhaps the most important similarity is how Bodhi and Sean are expected to grow up to be a firefighter and a police detective, respectively. We know that Henry is constantly teaching Sean lessons and everything from counting how many hats are in the room to teaching him how to escape from the trunk of a car. Sometimes young Gus is included on these lessons, like when Gus is Sean's lawyer when he gets in trouble. We know that something similar happened when Bodhi was little, right? Vince says he was excited for Bodhi to become a firefighter from the second he was born. Lately, we've heard from both Luke and Ruby that growing up, Bodhi wanted to be a firefighter exactly like Mom, Dad, and Uncle Luke. But even as I thought of this comparison, I couldn't help but think how different the world of police is portrayed in most media, including Psych, as compared to firefighters in the world of Fire Country. Psych is a show that values partnerships. Jules and Lassiter would die for each other, but also never sleep together. Henry was absolutely destroyed when his former partner shot him at the end of season 6, and one of my favorite scenes of Psych is when Mr. Yen is about to murder Gus via lethal injection at the end of season 5, and Sean goes, "You kill him, I kill you." While most firefighting media focuses on the brothership, that's not the world of Fire Country. There's one battalion chief, that was Vince. As of time of writing, it was Manny, but I think by the time you're seeing this, it's going to be Brett next week. The question of who is going to be the next battalion chief has existed implicitly since at least Where There's Smoke. The idea that there is one battalion chief is something that young Jake would have learned early on under Walter, a time when it's implied that the division chief didn't keep their office at Station 42. But I don't think that's the only lesson that Jake, and maybe Bodhi as well, learned from Walter. There's another lesson here too, one that I've been wanting to talk about for several months now, and we'll do that in a longer essay next week. But it's the idea that there's only one sun, there's only one heir. I mean, just for a second, let's take a step back and look at Vince and Luke. We only see 2 episodes of Walter, Luke, and Vince all together. I don't want to rehash them because I spent 45 minutes doing that in my Walter video, but I want to draw your attention to 2 things, and I can do that in the exact same scene within the same episode, the Leone way. The first important thing is that Walter does not like it when his sons get along. He tries to make them fight over Luke catching more fish. When that doesn't work, Walter compares Luke's promotion, making him ahead of Vince in the CAL FIRE chain of command and having a more impressive position than Sharon, to cheating. Bodhi and Jake don't know why Walter is doing this, so to them, it just looks like Nono is comparing Uncle Luke's job to cheating. So really, what Jake is seeing here, and it's possible that Bodhi isn't because he has lots of time with his father and uncle outside of just being around his grandfather, is that in this family, there is one main son. To Walter, that main son is Vince. Luke exists, but he's not important unless he is propping Vince up or being compared to Vince. To me, this is the big key. It explains all the behavior that we see from Jake in season 1, which means I can finally talk about Jake's arc. Many of the characters on this show have an arc that is predominantly anchored toward one person, and I think that's true with Jake as well. But his arc isn't predominantly anchored towards Bodhi, even though that's who he's competing with. Really, it's predominantly anchored towards Vince. We start season 1 with a good old-fashioned status quo episode. We see Jake and Eve as Vince and Sharon's kids. They joke about Jake's serial dating habits at the station, and he swears that he's going to come see Gabriella in Florida, something that, trust me, always works out in every single long-term relationship. Everything is just completely status quo until Bodhi punches him, and the two nearly get into a fight that Eve has to break up. What flows from here is Jake being given control over Bodhi's future in Fresh Prince of Edgewater. Bodhi freelanced to save Jake, and now Manny has to decide what he will do about it. Manny will make his decision after Jake and Eve write their reports. While Vince seems to treat this as a choice that both Eve and Jake have to make, to me, I feel like since Jake was the allegedly injured party, Manny would have gone with whatever Jake claimed happened. Throughout the episode's rescue, Eve and Jake argue about Riley, at one point causing them to mess up working on the fire hose, and Vince yells at them that they're supposed to be reliable. Later in the episode, Vince leaves them in charge of rescuing a prison guard that was hit by a piece of asphalt, and when they make it to the rec center, Vince sends Jake inside to deal with the chemical fire, then praises him in front of Bodhi. At the end of the episode, Eve is pretty clear to Jake that she thinks he would be a pretty shitty person if he sent Bodhi back. In the end, Jake does side with Eve, but Vince is so convinced that Jake will do what he wants that he tells Sharon there's no way Manny won't send Bodhi away. Bodhi stays, but only Sharon, Manny, and Vince know that it was because of Sharon's interventions. In the next episode, where there's smoke, Jake and Vince ride together in one of the engines to go up to Manor Mountain, part of Deadwater. I already talked about this scene in Vince's Part 1 essay, but Vince starts talking about how Jake and Bodhi used to be like brothers, and Vince doesn't know why Bodhi punched Jake. Jake gets real spooked when Vince says he knows why it happened, but then Vince starts talking about how it's because Bodhi is jealous. Jake is conveniently let off the hook when they almost get hit by a grower van. Jake and Vince end up being held hostage by Mojave when they get caught trying to save a kid who fell into Mojave's security pit. Jake unfortunately makes the situation worse by doing things like insulting Mojave and using the fact that Bodhi knows Mojave as an insult. In the end, it's not Jake that frees them, it's Vince, Manny, and Bodhi working together. Later that night, Vince does find out why Jake punched Bodhi. Then in the next scene, if you skip over the episode editing and the recap, Vince and Jake are sparring while Vince questions Jake about dating Riley. Unfortunately, the Bodhi got to you before I did line doesn't work for Jake because, as Vince said, Jake had years to tell them. Eventually, Vince takes his gloves off, says he's too upset to spar, and walks away. During the rescue, Vince is still irritable with Jake in a way that lets everyone know that he's angry. He threatens to leave Jake behind on a call and then puts him in charge of shutting off utilities while Vince takes Eve inside to be his right hand. When Jake makes it inside to help on the rescue, Vince sends Eve to be a medic, leaving him and Jake to work together. Vince almost dies getting hit by falling debris, and when Jake panics that Vince is going to die, Vince reminds Jake that he trained Jake to be the best. This snaps Jake out of his hurt that Vince hadn't been treating him well and gives him the idea to use a tube of oxygen to save Vince. Over the next 3 episodes, Jake and Vince don't do nearly as much together, even though they do work together in 2 of these episodes. In Get Some Be Safe, Vince tells Jake that he's going to have to get used to Gabriella being one of them, but that working with Sharon is one of the best things about Vince's job. He also puts Jake in charge of managing the probies, and together they work magic and find water. In Like Old Times, Vince takes a day off and Jake gets to take his place. But he finds out from Bodhi that Sharon has kidney disease, something that had been kept completely a secret until Vince calls the Cal Fire board, that is. At the end of the episode, Jake and Bodhi decide to be civil for Sharon's sake. Happy to Help is an episode mostly about Sharon, Bodhi, and Manny. Eve doesn't show up at all, and Gabriella is following Vince around for the first time. Jake is very much just there, and also upset because Gabriella doesn't want to move in with him. Finally, we get around to Bad Guy. I know I talked about this episode extensively in our first half episodes, but it goes really well in this essay too. Throughout the episode, we see Eve and Gabriella having to decide whether to go with Bodhi, who thinks the accident is causing Vince to have mental health issues, or Jake, who thinks accusing Vince of not being capable on this rescue is only going to make things worse. At first, Gabriella and Eve side with Jake, which, to be fair, Jake has spent a lot of time around Vince these last few years. However, Jake changes his mind and stands up to Vince, but that's mostly because the car is deteriorating and they're running out of time, so he decides the best course of action is to tell Vince that Manny's right. In No Good Deed, the penultimate episode of the Bodhi is Back arc, Jake's behavior takes a massive shift. Whereas before he had been trying to show that he was better than Bodhi and resisted actually trying to send him away, in this episode, Jake actually does try to get Bodhi sent away. He all but says to Erica that he lied about Bodhi punching him in the pilot. It's really hard to say if that's actually why Erica turns on Bodhi in this episode. It could be that he was always the easiest scapegoat, but it could also be that Jake gave her an easy villain. Either way, there's no doubt that she crafts the evidence in such a way to protect all of the civilian firefighters, including Manny, who committed an actual crime, so that Bodhi takes the fall for Meg's death, even though the only thing that Bodhi did was misjudge who between Meg and Gabriella needed saving first. At the end of the episode, Jake goes to break up with Gabriella, but they're still together and get your hopes up. Actually, there is one last thing to talk about in regards to Bodhi. When the truck crashes into the station, Vince, Jake, and Gabs are separated from Bodhi, Eve, and Manny. Each trio works on their own rescue, a fire for Jake, Vince, and Gabs, and an inmate trapped under the truck for our 3 Rock crew. After the fire, Vince tells Jake that his plan is to cook a meal for the inmates and the crew once the station is cleaned up, to which Jake gets mad at, but the camera takes us back over to the rescue before much else can happen. So while we have lots of symbolic one kid fighting over dad, because Bodhi sure does not care, in the Bodhi is Back arc, that fighting over who is the true son really kicks into gear during the kidney arc. During that arc, both Jake and Bodhi are revealed to be kidney matches for Sharon, having tested at the beginning of Mama Bear and had their results revealed at the end of Mama Bear. But while Eve is quick to say she isn't a match and Bodhi is quick to say he is, Jake kind of just decides to let his status stay a secret, or at least that was the original plan. However, in You Know Your Dragon Best, Jake learns that Bodhi is going to have to return to prison in order to recover from the transplant. Neither Vince nor Sharon like this option, but it's the only one they have to keep Sharon alive. Jake has been around the Leones long enough to understand that this is going to destroy them, so he steps up, and Vince is visibly upset that Jake didn't say anything before now. Bodhi is standing right there, and he gets incredibly pissed when he finds out Jake is trying to step into the role of donor. While Bodhi had previously expressed feelings that Vince was trying to replace him with Jake, and that Jake was walking around in Bodhi's life, this is actually the first time we get an open confrontation with all 3, though it doesn't last long enough to actually get any feelings expressed. At the end of the episode, Jake tells Bodhi this isn't about replacing Bodhi, but making sure that none of the Leones suffer because of Bodhi returning to prison. But we all know how this works out. You've seen this show. You know that Jake is approved for a transplant in Affair to Remember, and in False Promises, everyone is gathered round for the transplant, but it doesn't happen. He has a severe reaction to the anesthesia, and they aren't going to let him donate a kidney anymore. People often ask, but what would Jake do if he needed a surgery? An allergy doesn't mean surgery is impossible. It means risky and sometimes a Benadryl drip, which they don't want to do unless they absolutely have to. You don't want to know how I know. Jake does have one more attempt to get Sharon a kidney before the end of the season, but I'm going to have to talk about that when I get around to those 2 episodes at the end of this essay series. As a result, I'm really sorry about this, guys, but we're going to have to stop this analysis at False Promises instead of getting into My Kind of Leader, because I'm going to talk about that episode in regard to Jake when I talk about A Cry for Help and Off the Rails. That's where I'm going to be talking about all of the arson plot except for the part with Sharon that I talked about in Sharon's essay. And while yes, there are other things you could talk about with Jake, I originally thought this essay was going to primarily have to do with how poorly he treats Gabriella, but I'm going to have to save that for my summer essay series about sexism in Fire Country. You see, Jake's abusive treatment of Bodhi and Gabriella is kind of something that goes away. The competition with Bodhi for the most favored son role, however, does not. It's ongoing even as of Who Owns the Dirt, the most recent episode for me. I mean, it doesn't always look like Jake body checking Bodhi or telling Gabriella she can't talk to him like it does in season 1. It grows and changes in ways that I'm going to be talking about as I move through all the seasons of this show. But really what I want to do right now, as I've done for basically all of these essays, is talk about what it looks like in season 4. But in order to talk about what it looks like in season 4, I'm going to have to talk about what it looks like in season 3. If you remember the Suspects video where I talked about how no one has talked about how the last year of Vince's life was actually being treated pretty badly by the other characters, this is part of what I'm talking about. The first arc of season 3, the training arc, allows Jake to literally be in charge of whether or not Bodhi gets to be a firefighter. In Hot Wash, Jake protests Bodhi being hopscotched into the program, then psychs him out about the hot wash. He psychs him out again in Keep Your Cool when Bodhi is about to go on his first ride-along, and Vince literally has to get on to Jake about his treatment of Bodhi. There is some other things that happen throughout the arc, but we know Bodhi does become a firefighter, and at the end of the season, Jake just quits because Vince won't promise him that he's next in line to be battalion chief. He doesn't actually quit though, because he takes it back when Vince dies. And somehow the competition between Bodhi and Jake gets even worse when Vince dies. On the one hand, Jake was technically the captain of 42 when Vince died. By usual succession rules, that makes him the heir to the throne, but Brett doesn't care about their succession politics, just who's fit for the job. It kinda seems like the community doesn't care either, since Bodhi is the one giving the eulogy, managing donations at the station, and being told every 5 minutes, "Oh, I'm so sorry about your dad." Eve, the voice of reason in all things, tells Jake that there's no need for a fight between the two of them, but unfortunately there is a reason to fight. Both boys grow up watching the myth of the favored son, and Vince died without leaving a clear mark of who that was. Well, personally, I don't think Vince had a favorite son at the end. Both boys have reason to believe the other was his chosen son. Vince wrote his will when he believed Bodhi was dead, and then never corrected it, because of course he didn't. So to Bodhi, it's a sign that Vince never stopped picking Jake. On the other hand, literally 2 weeks before he died, Vince straight up refused to say that Jake was next in line, leading Jake to believe that Bodhi was the chosen son. They both feel insecure because Dad picked neither of them. And as of the writing of this video on February 11th, that's where we're at with Jake. You're probably wondering if after all of this exploration I did I start liking the guy? And the answer is no. I don't. I still think that on the whole, Jake treats people pretty poorly, including Vince. He's a bit like Manny in that respect, but unlike Manny, I can see it now. I can see oh yeah, Walter, Vince, and Luke just kind of screwed Jake up in the same way that they screwed Bodhi up. Of course, I wonder if Jake doesn't have some sort of insecurity, since Bodhi has canonically saved Vince's life 5 times, and Jake has canonically gotten Vince killed once. Okay, to be fair, Jake did get the assist on 3 of those saves. Oh, well, that's enough of my thoughts about Jake. We are officially at the end of the first part of these character essays, which feels so crazy to me. I feel like I just brainstormed this entire essay series yesterday, and now we're on the downhill slope. Next, though, I get to start my essays about institutions, and I was thinking that next week would be a great time to talk about the town of Edgewater. I know that I said I would be doing Kara next week, but instead I've decided that I'm going to put Kara back with the part 2s for the character essays, because all of the succession talk between Jake and Bodhi has gotten me really excited to talk about the kingdom they're fighting over.